Hi, Romans here, and in this video I'm going to tell you about how I wrote the music for Pioneers of Modern Narcissism. Similarly to Wrong Doors, this is also one of the tracks I had been performing with my previous band Slip of the Lip, but unlike Wrong Doors, this one is pretty close to how it sounded in its original version. I think I wrote it like late 2015, early 2016, and obviously there are a couple of differences. Let's first talk about the riff of this track. When we performed it with Slip of the Lip, there was double bass in terms of the drums, and I think that that's one of the most uncreative and unoriginal ways how to play rhythm when there's a riff going on. Now obviously when you listen to metal, double bass is basically everywhere, and I'm not saying I don't like it, I'm just saying that it's not very creative. With Slip of the Lip, the riff was just kind of messy, and in my opinion we kind of sounded like an alternative metal band, but it wasn't as punchy as it is now in my opinion. Now there's more like a half time, and I think it really makes you go, okay, so tell me, what do you think is heavier, the original riff or the new one? When you have a saxophone but you don't have guitars in metal music, when it comes to the verses of the Pioneers, it's basically just one chord. Brand new levels of hypocrisy have been reached by our fake beliefs. It's just one chord being held. But there was this really cool guitar lick that one of the guitar players in Slip of the Lip was playing throughout the entirety of the verses. Of course, it was much faster, but I thought it was a pretty cool thing arrangement-wise not to have in a song. My original idea was that we could have some synthesizer or some arpeggiator kind of playing it in the background. Then when we put some delay on the saxophone ended up playing that lick in the second half of the verse, and I think it manages to create very unique sound because it's such a metal thing to play, but I don't think this is what most saxophone players would come up with in a part like this. So this is like the perfect example of using saxophone in a metal context. Hypocrisy have been reached by our fake beliefs. Welcome to the modern masquerade. A perfect picture is your mask portray. Have you ever given up on something? What I mean by this is that you spend tremendous amount of effort, energy, time, and then at the end of it, all you're left with is sheer frustration and seemingly no result. This is kind of what happened when we were recording Pioneers of Modern Narcissism. I think that the saxophone solo is one of the best I've ever heard. I absolutely love it, and I think it's kind of like this jewel of the track. I think it manages to sit in that soft spot between being a jazz solo and being a metal solo, perfectly balancing both. It was, however, pretty difficult to get this solo. When we were recording solos in general with Lucas, we had this 3 takes approach, meaning that he would have 3 takes for whatever solo, and if he couldn't come up with anything interesting within those 3 takes, well, chances were he wouldn't be coming up with anything interesting with the following take, so it would be just wasted time. Most of the saxophone solos on the album really ended up being one of the first 3 takes, as I will be talking about the other tracks in this series, but this solo took 7 takes. We did 7 takes and we still didn't have the solo. What was making the solo really difficult is that there's not enough harmonic information in that solo part. Basically the synth and the bass were just playing one note at a time. It
doesn't give you enough information. Even though we knew what scale we were in, he just couldn't kind of improvise enough. So after 7 takes, he was totally frustrated, angry, exhausted. So he went into the back of the room and sat on the sofa, and he actually fell asleep. I felt that there was some potential in those solos. So basically there were 2 things I could have done. I could either push him to keep recording until we would get that perfect take, or I could look at the takes we had already had and basically try to use them. I decided to go with the second option, as he was already asleep on my couch. The way the solo was done was basically there were these 7 takes, and I took, you know, a little part here, little part here, little part here. Some things that you hear in the solo were not even played at the time when you actually hear them in the solo. It took like 30 minutes. After that, I woke him up, I gave him the headphones, and I could see his zero expectations look. He listened to it and he was like, wow, this is actually pretty good. I nailed it. And I was like, nah. We nailed it. Okay, so the lesson to be learned here is that sometimes you may actually end up with the feeling that you don't have any outcome or any result, but maybe what you actually need is some other person to have a look at that. And who knows, you just may have the final thing in your hands. It just needs some different perspective. How to use cliche in a non-cliche way. When it comes to the chorus of the Pioneers, it's a pretty interesting chorus because it doesn't really have any chord progression per se. It's more like a riff.
Let your ego rise with every like. No one cares what is behind those lies.
Now, when I wrote the chorus originally, this progression or this riff was throughout the whole chorus. But I felt that it was a bit boring. You know, if you have this like 4 times in a row, the chorus wears out pretty quickly. So I wanted to add something interesting there, and there's this part.
You're creating one big mirage.
And this is actually one of the most overused chord progressions ever. You have basically 1, 5, 6, 4. And if you go on a YouTube and check a video of 4-chord song, it's a pretty cool video where basically they keep playing the same 4 chords and all of the big hits that you know are using the same chord progression. When I revisited this track for Persons 2, I also considered different chord progressions, like for example,
you're creating one big mirage,
you know, to make it less cliched. But sometimes the most cliche thing works. In my music, I try to avoid cliches as much as possible. That's why my music is more progressive, more experimental. But I think that this shows how you can take something that's very cliche and use it in a context that nobody would really expect you to, and that really helps to make the chorus more interesting. Now, obviously, if the whole chorus was using that chord progression, it would have been super cheesy and super boring. But right now, there's, I think, this perfect balance where you have that heavy riff, and then when this chord progression comes in, it's suddenly a bit brighter. We go from minor to major, and it just creates like this almost like a gospel metal part. And yeah, this is how you can take something that's cliche and use it in a not so cliched context.